Have you heard about the garlic diet? Yeah, the garlic diet. After every meal, you eat a bunch of garlic. And you don't actually lose any weight, but from a distance, your friends all think you look thinner. This week's Parsha, Parshas Behaaloscha, we discuss the miraculous superfood, the manna, the bread from heaven that used to fall and nourish the Jewish people in the desert for 40 years. And it was a wonderful food, perfect nutrition, no waste, and could taste like anything you wanted, and yet they were complaining about it. What were they complaining about? So here's the thing. It could taste like anything you wanted, except with a few exclusions in the terms and conditions. This is what we read this week. The Jewish people are complaining, and they're recalling, they're remembering that back in Egypt, what did we used to eat? Eis hakshuyim, ve'eis ho'avtichim, ve'eis hachatzer, ve'eis habatzalim, ve'eis hashumim. We used to eat the cucumber, and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. Why were they mentioning these foods? So Rashi comments, and he says, Amar Rabbi Shimon, the Tana, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, and this is Rashi quoting Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's opinion from the Sifri. Why did the manna taste like, or could taste like, all the flavors in the world with the exclusion of these few items? He says, Mipnei she'ein koshim leminikois, they are harsh, they are difficult on nursing mothers. Like we say, oimrim leisha, we say to a woman, al toichli shumu batzel mipnei atinoik. If she's nursing, we say, don't eat onion or garlic because it's bad for the infant, for the nursing infant. And then Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says a mashal. He says mashal lemelech v'chulu. This is a parable, or it's described by way of a parable of a king. What's the parable of the king? It says he hired a tutor, a malamed, for his son, and before he gave the son over to the charge of the teacher, the king gave the allergy list to the teacher. He told the teacher, "Don't feed my son this and this and this. It's not good for him." And then the son, this is all the mashal that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says in the Sifri, which Rashi quotes, explaining our verse, that the son hears that the king gave his teacher a list of foods he's not allowed to eat. And the king hears, and the son hears this and says, "Oh, my father, the king, hates me. He wants to deprive me. That's why he told my teacher not to feed me this and this and this." And so too, the Jewish people were complaining that, "Oh, Hashem won't let these foods taste like this and this and this. He's being mean. He's trying to deprive us." Okay. So a few questions here. A few questions. First question is, as we say in Jewish, take. Like, yeah, indeed. Why did everyone have to be deprived because certain flavors are not good for nursing mothers and their infants? I mean, it's a small segment of the population, and because of them, a concern for them, everybody has to miss out from these flavors. So that's the first question. Question number one. Question number two. Why does Rashi mention that this explanation is from the Tana Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai? Rashi is always quoting Chazal, he's always quoting our sages, but he doesn't necessarily say the name of the specific sage that a teaching comes from. And in this case he does, so what? It must be significant. And that's the second question. Question number three. The parable that Rabbi Shimon gives doesn't seem to exactly match up. Because in the parable, the king didn't want the son to eat certain foods because those foods were bad for the son. The son had a problem with those foods. In the actual case that the parable is supposedly describing, Hashem prevented the manna from tasting like those foods, not because it would damage the Jewish people, but it would damage others, or it would damage a small minority segment within the people. So in the parable, it was protecting the person for his own good, not to eat food that would be damaging to him. But that doesn't explain the complaint that the Jews had, which was, why should we lose out? The food's not bad for us. It's not damaging us. It would damage, nursing mothers and their children, but that's them, not us. And so how does the parable explain that? How does it give any more clarity to To the contrary, it just magnifies the discrepancy between the case that the metaphor which is describing, which makes sense. You don't let a person eat something that would damage him, and then the case that actually happened where people were being deprived of foods that wouldn't be damaging to them, it would be damaging to someone else. So, which is sort of like our first question. Taka, yeah, why? Why indeed did everyone miss out because of this small segment of the population? Okay, and that's our third question. So, question number one, yeah, why did everyone have to miss out on those flavors? Because of nursing mothers and babies, and who are really not certainly not a significant number of people. Okay, that's first of all. Second of all, why does Rashi mention specifically this as a teaching from Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai? And third of all, what's the parable about? Because the parable seemingly doesn't explain the thing that we're confused about. The parable is about someone not eating things that would be bad for him, where the actual situation is people are not being allowed to eat foods that would be bad for someone else. Okay, fine, good. So I want to ask you a question. Have you ever heard the name Norman Borlaug? No, probably not. You're not terribly ignorant. Most people haven't heard of Norman Borlaug. He saved 1 billion people. Now you're thinking to yourself, hold on a second. First of all, how can one person save 1 billion people? That's crazy. Second of all, if he really saved 1 billion people, how come I never heard of him and you're telling us that you don't think most people have heard of him? And I don't think most people have heard of him. So, what's the story here? Who's Norman Borlaug? Well, I'll tell you, Norman Borlaug passed away a little over 10 years ago at the age of 95. He was a retired professor at Texas A&M University, and he was a plant biologist from Texas. That's who he was, and he saved 1 billion lives. How? Okay, so you need a little background. You have to know that in 1968, one of the best-selling books was called The Population Bomb, and this was based on all of the best science of that day, which said that we were about to face a crisis called the population bomb, where 1 billion people were going to die. There was no way around it. That's what was going to happen, because if population would continue to increase, people were going to starve to death. There was going to be a massive famine. Why? Because there's only a certain amount of arable land. That means land that actually produces crops. And it's not enough nutrition. The math doesn't add up. You don't have enough land to produce enough produce that would provide enough nutrition for the amount of human beings to live that we're about to for that number of a populace, the global population that was about to be in the 1970s. So in 1968, it was predicted that in the 1970s, there's going to be the population bomb. And 1 billion people are going to starve to death and die. And according to everything they knew and everything they could have known, they were right. So how come there wasn't a population bomb? How come we don't hear about 1 billion people dying in the 1970s? How come, in fact, since the 1970s, there's a few more billion people on the planet and everybody has food? And by the way, you should know that there is more than enough food to feed the planet today. And anytime there is starvation, unfortunately, it's not because of an inability to produce the food, that the earth can't produce the food. It's because of human greed and corruption. We don't have a food shortage problem. We have a food distribution problem. There are countries that throw away more food than other countries eat. So the earth is producing plenty of food. But how come in 1968 all the scientists said that we were hitting a wall where it would be impossible? It would be impossible to feed the world any longer. Because they didn't predict Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug came along and he developed a new strain of wheat kernel that was more resistant to pests and to disease. And it ended up yielding 2 or possibly 3 times as much as wheat kernels had been accustomed to yielding. And he perfected that strain of wheat kernel. He sent it to India. He sent it to Pakistan. Then he did the same type of adaptation with rice. And he sent that rice to Asia, to China, and world crisis averted. The famine that was supposed to take 1 billion lives ended up never occurring, never taking place. And indeed, since that time, many more billions of human beings are alive today. All because of one guy, Norman Borlaug. But you see, here's what I want to talk about. For us Jews, the idea, the notion that one person could be responsible for a billion lives is not so far-fetched. We have this idea, we have this concept. In fact, the aforementioned Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, the Tana, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai that we mentioned earlier, he said something similar about himself. Lahavdil. Rabbi Shimon in the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis, he says, Yochalani lifter es kol ha'olam kulei min adin. He says, with my merits, I can protect the entire world from punishment. So not just a billion people, but the entire world population. We have an idea, we have a concept in Judaism that there's the power of an individual, and that individual can be equal to an entire world. And when Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said this, he wasn't bragging, he wasn't being conceited, chas v'shalom, God forbid even entertain such a notion. But let me explain. If you would ask Norman Borlaug, tell me the truth, don't lie, did you save a billion people? He would have to tell you, yeah, I saved a billion people. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was saying the same thing. It's a certain fact, these are the Zichos, these are the merits that I have, and it's sufficient to exempt the entire world from judgment. That's just a fact. No arrogance whatsoever. And this is an important concept. This is an important idea. That there is such an idea of an individual who can have global impact. An individual who can save an entire world. So with that in mind, I want to tell you a story. I just want to tell you one story. And it's a story about a failed lecture. What is the failed lecture? The Rebbe Shliach in Melbourne, Australia, Rabbi Chaim Gutnick, Olav Shalom, he used to come once a year to the Rebbe in Yechidus, in private audience, and discuss what was going on in Australia, discuss his work as a Shliach. And one year he came, and the Rebbe told him that it would be a good thing to have classes in Taras HaMishpacha, family purity, mikveh, the laws of mikveh. And Rabbi Gutnick was nervous about it because he felt that it was a hard sell for the community at that time. But the Rebbe told him that he should do it, so therefore he knew that he should do it. And when he got back to Melbourne, he spoke with his wife and he said, we're going to have to make some classes on mikveh because the Rebbe has specifically encouraged us to do so. So they went and they planned a whole course, a series of classes. And they advertised, they did a whole advertising campaign. And they rented a hall, they had a big space because they advertised, they're going to have a big turnout. And that fateful night came for the lecture in Taharas Mishpacha and Mikveh for all the women of Melbourne. And they waited and waited and waited. And one woman showed up. One woman showed up. I want to tell you something. Anyone who's ever run an event knows that having one person show up is worse than no people showing up. Because if no people show up, what do? You go home, and if anyone asks, hopefully no one asks, but if anyone asks, you say, oh, it was very nice, it was a nice event. Well, how many people were there? I don't count. Who counts? Right? But if one person shows up, now you're stuck. Now you have a witness. Now they see they're the only person who showed up. So he was really, really embarrassed, and he apologized to her, and he says, I'm sorry, I'm going to cancel. She said, no, I want to hear. Teach me. So he says, okay, fine, I'll teach you. So he taught her. After that, they said, okay, now they said it was a series of classes. So, okay, we have another week to really promote it. Let's try to get more people. And they did everything they could to promote it, to advertise. Came the next week, and the one woman showed up. Same woman. Rabbi Gutnick apologized profusely. I'm sorry, I don't know why. She says, it's okay, I want to learn. So he taught her. He taught her just one woman. Anyways, the next year, Rabbi Gutnick was again in New York, and he went into Yechidus with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe specifically asked him about how were the classes for the women in Melbourne on Taras HaMishpacha and the laws of mikveh. Now, it wasn't something that Rabbi Gutnick was very eager to report on, okay, because it was a failed lecture. So Rabbi Gutnick apologized and he said, we promoted it, we advertised it, I don't know what happened, but it was a failure. The Rebbe says, what was the failure? Well, we had a very low turnout. What was a low turnout? Only one woman came. It was just one woman came. It was a failure. And the Rebbe got very, very serious. And the Rebbe said to Rabbi Gutnick, Sag mir, wie viel Mamis hat Moshe Rabbeinu gehabt? Mehr wie eine? Tell me, how many mothers did Moses have? More than one? Or just one? One mother. One Jewish mother who gave birth to one little Jewish child changed the entire world as we know it. So tell me, you call that a failure? That's not only not a failure, that's a success of global proportions. Teaching one mother who's going to give birth to one child is not just a child, it's a world. It's a world. Because one person can affect an entire world. That's the power of the individual. That's the power of one. Now I want to make something very clear here. When I say this is the power of the individual, this is the power of one, I don't only mean a Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai or a Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean each one of us. Yes, there are those who historically everyone knows their name and everyone knows their contribution and how they saved the world and they affected the entire world, and even millennia later people still are living with their influence. Yes, that's true. There are people like that. But every soul, every one of us came to the world for some unique contribution. It is axiomatic that there are no redundant souls. No two of us came to the world for the same mission. If you came to this world, you came here to do something for the world that no one else can do. And therefore, in that way, you have a contribution to make that is global and that the whole world is waiting for. So each one of us affects an entire world. And that's the answer to all of our questions now. Now we can answer all of our questions. First question. Why did everybody have to miss out and not have the garlic and the onion? Why? Because it's just going to affect a few nursing mothers and their babies? What are you talking about? A nursing mother and her baby is a world. That's not an individual. That's a world, because every individual has a gift to give to the entire world. That's the answer to question number one. Question number two. Why does Rashi say that it's Shimon ben Yochai specifically who provided this teaching? Well, because Shimon ben Yochai is a prime example of someone who had a global impact. Yochalani lifters kol ha'olam kulei min hadin, like the Gemara says. Rabbi Shimon was somebody who had that global influence where we see the global influence that the individual can have. That's question two. And question three, the parable seemingly doesn't fit, because in the parable, the father told the teacher, don't feed my son anything that would damage him. But in the situation with the man, it was a little bit different, where the Jewish people were being deprived of food. It wouldn't damage them, it would damage somebody else, the nursing mothers and the infants. But that's not exactly so, is it? Because if a child is a world and has a gift for the entire world and can affect the entire world, so then something that damages that child damages the entire world, because then the entire world would be bereft, would miss out, would be lacking that gift that that child has to give to the world. That answers our third question. So now we've answered all of our questions. And the lesson is very simple and the lesson is very clear. Each one of us is a world. Each one of us has a gift, has a mission that's unique. And the world is waiting for each one of us to reveal what that gift is.